Hello to the U.S. Department of Education and PTAC's webinar on integrated data systems, connect education data with local communities. And I'm with the Privacy Technical Assistance Center. With me is Michael Hawes, who's of Student Privacy Policy at the Office of the Chief Privacy Officer within the U.S. Department of Education. Thank you and good afternoon. Logistics for you. For now, we have muted all lines. This to ensure that all participants can hear and information can be provided uninterrupted. We do Q&A and chat feature in the right-hand lower corner of your webinar screen. At any time, please feel free to insert your questions. We review some of the questions at the end, and if we don't get to them today, we plan to use them for further clarification of the guidance in coming months. As this recording and associated slide deck will be posted in a few weeks on the PTAC website. This webinar is intended to provide you with a high-level overview of our most recent guidance on integrated data systems and student privacy. To read full guidance, please go to ptac.ed.gov. It is on the front page in the recently released documents section. We need to define what we mean when we use the term integrated data system. There are variations of integrated data systems, and our intent is to show you an example, specific to Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. I'll show you how this works in a local community-based setting, how privacy laws intersect with community-based IDSs, highlight some best practice considerations as it relates to your student privacy during implementation of an IDS. Also, you leadership will need to decide if IDS achieves the objectives needed to measure your program policy goals, and if those objectives outweigh the potential risks and costs of implementing an IDS. Visual displays the variety of possible external inputs and external administrative data that are considered to be part of an IDS. The possibility of a plethora of federal, state, and local laws may play into any linked personally identifiable data depending on the agencies and/or the data involved. First, with Head Start data, you'll consider recently released Head Start regulations on privacy. Vital statistics, you may consider HIPAA implications, and with employment and earnings, you'll consider U.S. Department of Labor laws. As always, we recommend consult with your local legal counsel to not only consider the federal laws, but also any state and local laws that may have additional protections and/or restrictions on sharing. For discussion, we want to clarify our focus for the day. The symbol on the left represents a state longitudinal data system hosted IDS. These are usually hosted at a state level and have many different considerations than those of a local community-based IDS. For the purpose of today's discussion, we're focusing on IDSs that are hosting local data with local government or a local university. We'll provide later in the webinar will describe how that IDS was structured from a high level. This provides examples of both state longitudinal IDSs and local-based IDSs. The examples of established state systems with full K-12 participation. The orange represent the locally established IDSs. For instance, Now Public Schools has been partnering with local agencies to determine the impact of school programs on students' reading. Time data on the students such as school attendance, behavior, and academic coursework achievements to determine which programs are a good fit for students. The advantage of using an IDS is access to real-time data and can be more useful than waiting until the end of the year to look at the results that programs have on students. It can also help determine other programs that may be of use for students and/or their parents, such as homeless vouchers or availability for free food programs within the local community. That with the significant advantages that integrated data systems provide, There are significant investments in technology as well as data sharing agreements to ensure that data is secure. Access is only provided to those authorized. Allegheny County Department of Human Services is the example we want to share with you today. As you see, they already host a significant amount of internal sources such as child welfare, home mental health, and some ancillary Head Start and early intervention education programs. The extras include K-12, specifically Pittsburgh Public Schools and surrounding districts, births, the House Authority, and juvenile probation. As you imagine, these sources can be a wealth of information to inform and improve the educational outcomes for children and students. One big advantage to the Department of Human Services hosting the IDS in this scenario is already fully understand HIPAA constraints and privacy regulations. As of certain health data, they control access to the linked data to only those who are authorized by their agency. Later, we will discuss how K-12 is able to contribute to an IDS and be compliant with FERPA. Describes the primary purposes and scope of the Allegheny County Integrated Data System. You can see that they have specific goals such as addressing chronic absenteeism and improving school stability through improved placements of students. The integrated data allows Allegheny to look at homeless data to provide homeless prevention services at the school level. They analyze, critically reflect, and then take action based on data. In addition to analytical data, when really appropriate, the read data from the IDS can allow caseworkers to have access to education records on whether foster children have been absent from school. Under the recently enacted Uninterrupted Scholars Act, caseworkers are allowed to have access to foster children's education records. Caseworkers to make quick, informed decisions by seeing children's education records integrated into their case management system.
In order to discuss the creation and participation of a school district or state educational agency in an integrated data system, it's important to understand the legal requirements surrounding protection and use of education data in those contexts. We have time today to go through a full kind of review of FERPA and its relevant provisions. But there are a few terms and definitions that it's important to understand in the IDS context. So we'll go through those very briefly. At its core, FERPA requires the written consent of a parent or eligible student before disclosure of any personally identifiable information from the student's education records. In an extent applies. So there are a few terms in there that need to be parsed out a little bit. The first is personally identifiable information. PII in the FERPA context has a very specific definition. It includes your usual suspects. It includes your direct identifiers like name, social security number, student ID number, anything with a one-to-one relationship to the student. Includes your indirect identifiers. Think contextual information like gender, race and ethnicity, anything that has like a many-to-one relationship to the student that could help narrow down who the student is. But also includes a third category in the legal definition, and that's any other information that I own or combination with other information would allow a reasonable person in the school community to re-identify the individual with any reasonable certainty. So it's either linked or linkable information could be reasonably used to identify a student. They also count as PII under the law. Another term that needs definition in this context is education records. Again, education record is anything that's directly related to the student that's maintained either by or on behalf of an educational agency or institution. So FERPA protects any PII from those education records from disclosure without consent, unless an exception applies. Now, consent under the law has to be signed by the parent of the eligible student, and to specify what information can be disclosed, who it can be disclosed to, and for what purposes. But there are also exceptions to that consent requirement. There are a number of them that cover various type situations. Three most relevant exceptions in the context of integrated data systems are disclosure to other school officials, both within and outside the school, disclosures for audits and evaluations, and disclosures for certain types of studies. And we'll go through these exceptions in a little more detail later on in this presentation. Lastly, it's important to remember that there's a distinction under FERPA between disclosure of PII and disclosure of de-identified data. Properly de-identified data can be disclosed without a FERPA exception and without consent, as long as you have gone through the proper steps to make sure that it is in fact de-identified. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So in order to participate in an integrated data system, a school district must ensure that there are appropriate under FERPA for each of the aspects of participation in the IDS. And the thing to remember here is that different exceptions may apply at different stages of the participation and use of the IDS. So it's helpful to think about this as a two-stage process, different exceptions applying in the two different stages. The graphic here highlights how you can approach this and lays it out in graphical terms. In stage one, you're talking about the establishment and decision to participate in the IDS, the initial provision of PII from education records to, in this case, the lead agency for the integrated data system, what will the IDS lead. And so this is provision of PII for either a school district or a state or local educational authority to the IDS lead for the purposes of establishing the linked data. Then stage two, which is the use of the data that are linked and integrated within the IDS, approval and review of any particular uses that are being proposed for the integrated data, and ultimately disclosure and or release of results of those analyses or disclosure of identifiable data to a third party for the purpose of conducting another evaluation or study. And we'll talk more about these different steps in a moment. A few things to note, however. There are different ways that integrated data systems can be structured. You can have a fully federated integrated system model where the residing in a single place, they reside in their source agencies and are linked on the fly, so to speak. That type of federated model is not the subject of today's discussion, although there are examples of fully federated IDS out there. What we're going to talk about today is the data warehouse model, where agencies provide or provision data on a periodic basis to the IDS lead, where it is integrated and linked and then stored securely in that repository. It is important to remember that our focus today is on FERPA, but there are additional federal, state, and maybe local laws that may apply in your context. Always check with your own legal counsel whenever sharing data with third parties to make sure that you're abiding not just by FERPA, which we're talking about, but also by any other federal, state, or local laws that may also be relevant to you. So what does it mean to participate or become a partner in an integrated data system? Well, the step is it requires a commitment to providing data to that integrated data system on a regular basis, either yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, whatever. An integrated data system is an ongoing project. It's not just a single linkage of data across agencies. It's the commitment to engage in ongoing evaluation or ongoing research that linked data over time. It's not a single project, it's an ongoing relationship. Another that participation in IDS means is it means that there is going to be some entity that is managing that system who will have ongoing access to either fully identifiable or semi-identifiable education records and the fully identifiable or semi-identifiable data from those other agencies as well. And then participation in the IDS means a general openness to engage in multi-agency or cross-agency research and evaluation. Individual project must be approved and must be permissible under all of those relevant laws, but the purpose of an integrated data system is to engage in cross-agency evaluations where you're looking at the relative impact of multiple factors from multiple data sources. So we mentioned this a moment ago, the two FERPA exceptions to the consent requirements that are most relevant when establishing an integrated data system are the school official exception and the audit and evaluation exception. The school official exception can only be used by school districts. Essentially, it's what allows school districts to bring in third parties to perform services within the district. So school official can be used by school districts. The other alternative is the audit and evaluation exception. This allows disclosure without consent for the purposes of auditing or evaluating early or state-supported education programs. This exception can be used for disclosure without consent school districts and state and local educational authorities. So more entities can make use of this exception than can the school official exception, but both will work for the establishment of the IDS. So let's talk about the audit and evaluation exception first, since this has the broadest relevance. Put briefly, the audit and evaluation exception allows a school district or a local educational authority or a state educational authority to disclose PII from students' education records with consent to their authorized representatives. And the regulations specify this definition of authorized representative, but it's essentially any third party who is acting on behalf of the school district or SEA or LEA who has been properly designated and who will be performing an or evaluation of a federal or state-supported education program. So in the text of an integrated data system, in terms of establishing the IDS, you have to think about the construction and integration and maintenance of the data as parcel of audit and evaluation exception and the evaluation, the ultimate evaluation of an education program. And this is necessary because integration of these data will then facilitate future audits and evaluation of these federal or state-supported education programs by establishing and maintaining those linked data. So this is permissible under the audit and evaluation exception, and in your written agreements between the school district, LEA or SEA, and the IDS lead, you would then, in the place where you need to specify how it fits within the audit and evaluation exception, you would specify here this purpose to facilitate these future evaluations by providing and establishing linked data. Alternative exception, which school districts and LEAs can use, is the school official exception. The school official exception allows districts to disclose, again, PII from education records without parental consent to a third party, provided that third party is performing some function or service that the district would otherwise use its own employees to perform. Third party is under the direct control of the district with regard to how they're using and maintaining the PII from education records. The party can only use any data they receive in a manner consistent with how the school or district has defined school legitimate educational interest in their annual notice to parents of their rights under FERPA. A third party cannot redisclose PII from education records except under the direction of the school and as permitted by FERPA. So in this context, if a school district wants to use the school official exception to establish an IDS, they're essentially saying that the IDS lead is serving as a school official for the purposes of creating an integrated data infrastructure, including the linkage of education data with other IDS data sources, maintaining security of those data and controlling access. So this can be seen as functions that the school otherwise perform themselves if they had the resources and the expertise. So in a nutshell, there are two possible exceptions that can be used to establish the IDS. School districts can use the school official exception, and then school districts, local educational agencies, state educational agencies can use the evaluation exception. So once you've established an integrated data system, then you don't just create it for the sake of creating it. You want the data to be able to be usable to perform various cross-agency evaluations and research. And the ideas for that research and the proposals for how those integrated and linked data can be used come from a variety of different stakeholders, including government agencies, research institutions, the general public, service providers within the community. Where these requests are coming from, the IDS lead plays a central role in that data access and data analysis process. But the key thing to keep in mind when evaluating and responding to these information requests is primary distinction between identifiable data and release of de-identified data. Identified data can either be de-identified aggregate data or summary statistics, or it can be de-identified individual level data. And the process we would use to de-identify it will differ in those two contexts. But in a nutshell, the IDS lead has to create this divide between what they're releasing generally to the public as de-identified data and what they're releasing under specific restrictions of the law in identifiable form. So de-identified data. Well, and what to do with it? Well, de-identified data is not considered to be a disclosure under FERPA. But de-identification as a process is trickier than a lot of people initially think. You start to de-identify data by removing all of your direct and indirect identifiers. This is where you strip off anything that can uniquely identify the student, name, student ID number, social security number, address, all of those direct and indirect identifiers that obviously re-identify an individual. That is not enough to fully de-identify a data file, because a lot of other contextual information, demographic information, transaction information, course information, can be pieced together to find an individual if you have enough pieces of information that you can link. So as needed, pre-identification of education data, and particularly data that are linked between education, health, and so on, the many different agencies that are participating in your IDS, proper identification will often require the application of one or more additional statistical methods to reduce the risk of re-identification from the resulting file. And those methods can include one or more combinations of aggregation, suppression, blurring, or perturbation. We don't have time today to go into the details of how to apply these methods, but we do have some resources on our website that we can point you to during the Q&A. In a nutshell, in order to be able to release the identified data, you need to strip these direct identifiers off. You probably need to perform one or more statistical methods to reduce the re-identification risk. And you need to perform a disclosure avoidance analysis on the resulting file to make sure that the risk of re-identification has been properly mitigated. If the IDS lead, however, is looking to release identifiable data, well, then you have FERPA restrictions and the restrictions of other laws that come into play. And the IDS lead may only redisclose PII from a student's education records to a third party in very limited situations. In case when the project falls under either FERPA's audit and evaluation exception or under FERPA's studies exception. And in either case, all the required criteria for those two exceptions that are specified in the regulations need to be met, and the recipient needs to comply with them. In both cases, written agreement is required. That might be the written agreement that established the IDS, if it was properly laid out in the governance documents, or in many cases it may require the thing of a separate written agreement between the educational agency and the third party. Particularly under audit and evaluation, the purposes of evaluation or the study will need to be properly spelled out in the term of the agreement, and there are always provisions relating to data security, data access, and prevention of further redisclosures that have to be in there. We have resources available online that can point out what the specific requirements for written agreements are for both of these exceptions. Of which method you choose to share data, whether it's identifiable data or de-identified data, IDS lead can only make use of the data that are integrated into the IDS for the very specific purposes that are permitted within the legal framework, governance framework, of the action partner, be it the school district, LEA, SEA, established with the IDS lead when becoming an IDS partner. Now, there is a spectrum along which those governance requirements can be established in those documents, ranging from substantial action on one end to explicit and established controls on the other end. The spectrum relating to most control need to be project-specific written agreements for every single data use that the IDS lead is going to use the data for. On their end, maybe a number of pre-approved research questions that are already drafted into the governance document, actually establishing what pre-approved permitted projects already included in the governance. Anywhere in between. How you choose to set these up, level of control that is permitted or established within the governance documents depend largely on how fleshed out the purposes of the IDS have been in advance of the creation of the IDS, also the level of trust that exists between the IDS lead and the education partner, and how fully specified the various intended research and evaluation purposes have been. So there's a spectrum that you can establish for governance here. There is no right or correct position. A lot of it will depend on the context of your specific community. It should be noted, most discussion today has been on use of integrated data systems for program evaluation and research. In cases, the exceptions that we've talked about, FERPA's studies and audit evaluation exception, will not permit the use or operation of an IDS to provide direct services to students. There are some specific situations in which direct service workers may be able to access from students' education records through an IDS for service provision. We're not going to cover those today, but there are a few, including, for example, the Uninterrupted Scholars Act. We can answer questions on that separately if necessary.
Which we gave an example.
Which we gave an example,
yeah. Earlier.
Concluding the FERPA recap here, again, FERPA can be very complicated when you're looking to integrate education records with other data sources. The way to conceive it and to do it within the confines of the law would be to conceptualize the creation and use of an IDS as a two-stage framework, with stage one being the initial kind of creation and governance structure of the IDS, where you're deciding to participate and then visioning the education records into the system, and stage two being the use of the data by the IDS lead, reviewing and approving third-party research requests, and provisioning of any outputs from those research or evaluation projects either to the public or to third-party entities, and all as the second stage, with different FERPA exceptions applying in each case. And I'll now turn things back over to Baron to talk about some best practices.
Thanks, Michael. So we covered the legal requirements. Let's discuss some best practices as it relates to data systems. First, important to be very deliberate in communicating what you are collecting and how it will benefit the community or parents. In absence of information, the community's natural tendency will be to assume the worst. Second, ensure that when you do communicate, you consider your wording to be something that is understandable to the general public. Consider running language by a focus group or a group of parents to get their initial reaction. It's important that when you do communicate, you consider multiple media, such as website, flyers, and discussions at community meetings. Finally, it's important to be transparent about your policies, procedures, and technology to protect data. Access is limited to only those who need to know. For example of why that person would need access to integrated data. For instance, the caseworker that we gave as an example, to be on behalf of a student, a foster care student specifically, who's consistently missing school. Excellent example of showing value of the combined data. Considering what problems the system will help alleviate in your community, and make sure you also consider a feedback mechanism, such as phone number or email address or website, community members to voice their concerns or questions. More detail about some specific best practices. Decision authority. This is arguably going to be your most contentious yet most important structure you establish. To establish this, trust and formal agreements must be achieved. The objective of this recommendation is to assign appropriate levels of authority to agencies involved as it relates to individual data as well as the linked data set. Define the roles of the agencies involved and formalize decision-making for the IDS. And procedures. And enforcing clear policies and procedures within an IDS data governance structure is necessary to ensure that everyone in the organization understands the importance of data quality and security, and that the IDS staff are motivated and empowered to enforce these policies. Some policies include, but are not limited to, data release procedures, data policies and procedures, and security standards and policies. An inventory of all data within the IDS that require protection is a critical step. Maintain up-to-date inventory of all sensitive records and data systems, including those that are used to store and process data, enables the IDS to target its data security and management efforts. Data by sensitivity helps the data management team recognize where to focus security efforts. Data management, define appropriate managerial and user activities related to handling IDS is necessary to provide data stewards and users with access to appropriate tools for complying with the IDS security policies. Ensure that data are accurate, relevant, timely, and complete for the purposes they are intended to be used is a high priority issue for any organization. The key to maintaining high quality data is a proactive approach to data governance that requires establishing and regularly updating strategies for preventing, detecting, and correcting errors or misuse of data. Probably the second most important practice is defining and assigning differentiated levels of data access to individuals based on their roles and responsibilities within IDS. It's to preventing unauthorized access and minimizing the risk of data breaches. We also data minimization, that is limiting access to the fewest number of individuals as possible with access to the linked PII. Recordation, keeping that FERPA's recordation requirements apply, so ES needs to have a mechanism to record any disclosures of education records containing PII. Security and risk management, in the security of sensitive and personally identifiable data and mitigating the risks of unauthorized disclosure of these data should be a top priority for an IDS. Have a comprehensive security framework been developed? Has a risk assessment of vulnerabilities related to inadvertent disclosures and malicious individuals? Do you data breach? Do you really monitor or audit your data security and or access to the system? Do you really review your data sharing agreements for compliance with ever-changing state, federal, and local laws? Michael discussed earlier, have appropriate procedures for such as rounding and cell suppression being implemented properly to ensure there's no inadvertent disclosure of PII on any public reports out of the EDS. IDS can be a tremendous asset for a local community. The ability to have access to real-time linked data can answer policy questions or provide caseworkers with information needed to ensure equitable and appropriate interventions and educational opportunities for children. These provide the local community with empowering information regarding what programs are working well and assist the average citizen and policymaker with information not usually available. It's important to remember the true costs associated with linkage, technology, data sharing agreements, and being appropriately transparent about an IDS. Linked data is only a partial success. It's to ensure your system has the necessary controls and communication strategies to truly make the system a community asset. On this, we've provided a list of resources as part of this webinar. Again, these slides will be made available on our website at ptac.ed.gov in the next couple of weeks. We appreciate the opportunity to share this exciting new guidance and hope this webinar has been helpful for you. If you haven't already, please any questions you have in the chat box or Q&A box in the lower corner of your screen. We'll pour a couple of minutes to see if there are any questions and start the Q&A portion in about 1 minute.